right, good morning, everyone. I'm Greg Barr. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Phoenix Business Journal. We're certainly glad to be a media sponsor for this event. Good to see a nice turnout today, and hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. So, despite the headlines we saw in the first quarter from the legacy automakers like Ford and GM about slowing prospects for EVs and production target pullbacks, and then, of course, our daily machinations that we hear from Elon Musk. Projections for the industry aren't quite caught up in the big dip that everybody's talking about for this year. So if you're forward thinking, you're looking at what's next and not what's the shiny object that happened last week. The latest data from Bloomberg says we're expecting a 21% increase in global EV sales this year, which represents 16.7 million units. And 70% of those would be fully electric. It also predicts commercial vehicle EV sales are going to double to 1 million units this year. So at this point, everyone's looking at 2026 as the inflection point when EVs take off, literally with the introduction of multiple new, cheaper models coming that year, maybe even starting in late 25, when we could see the industry sort of catch up to some of these big projections that we see, for net zero emissions. As for market share, as of this morning, Tesla has 55.8% of the U.S. share in EVs. So they're still the big elephant in the room. The 20 other competitors that register as having any market share, the largest is Ford at a little over 6%. But even with these promising signs, what's being talked about in the market that's still holding EVs back in some way in the public perception is three issues, right? Range anxiety for drivers, vehicle price, and we talked about what could be coming in a couple of years there. And then, of course, dealing with supply chain issues, critical materials, the costs, how that affects the pricing of the final product. So our panelists today are in the thick of the EV industry's rapid growth and have an insider's view of the action. So I'll please welcome them to the stage. We have Don Morrissey, the Senior Director of Government Affairs at Gotion, the world's second largest EV battery maker with operations in China, the US, and other countries. And Mike Battaglia, Chief Operations Officer with Blink Charging. Their headquarters are in Maryland, but they do have operations right here in Tempe. So let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to start with you, Mike. Maybe you could just give us a quick overview as to, the extent of how big the company is and where your operations are and your main focus right now.
Yeah, will do. Thanks, Don. So number one, great to be here. Number two, I started at Blink about 4 years ago, and in full year 2019, the company had $2.7 million worth of revenue and less than 50 employees. And fast forward to today, again, not even 4 years, we have close to 700 employees, and we just recorded full year $140 million worth of revenue. So it has been, needless to say, kind of a crazy ride. We have operations, as Don mentioned, we have, or as Greg mentioned, we have our headquarters in Maryland. We have an office here in Tempe. My son goes to ASU as well, so we are somewhat ingrained here. And then we have offices in Amsterdam, in Belgium, as well as the UK. So we operate charging stations in about 27 countries currently.
Okay, so let's talk about this whole idea of, we hear the expression range anxiety, and something that I think you'd eventually want to see replaced by range confidence, right? So when do we reach that point where, the charging stations can be just like convenience stores? I mean, Los Angeles is kind of an outlier. They're ahead of the game in some ways, that one city, but talk about range anxiety for a second. So the number one reason why someone doesn't buy an EV, according to any survey that's done, is range anxiety. When you buy an EV, there's this phenomenon that happens. So you purchase an electric vehicle, and you go into ridiculous charging habits. So in other words, you get the car, you drive a few miles, you plug it in every day.
And then you realize you don't have to do that at all. And there is a learning curve associated with owning an EV where you don't have to plug it in every day, and you do it once a week or once every few days or however many miles, obviously, that you drive. There's a couple really amazing statistics out there. Number one, a vehicle sits idle, passenger vehicle, more than 90% of the time. And we're going to come back to that in a minute and why that's significant in terms of EV charging infrastructure. The second is, I believe this is the correct number. There's 127 million households in the United States that have 2 or more vehicles. So the opportunity out there to have one vehicle be an EV where you're tooling around town, and the second vehicle be internal combustion where you're taking longer road trips, that's an immense market. And I only couch it that way because you can take an EV on longer road trips. The point is that if you are hesitant about doing it, in most households across the U.S., there's very, very easy solutions to that.
Sure. And now let's give the audience a quick overview on the technology of where we're at now with the with charging units themselves. What's the most prevalent and what's about the change that you mentioned to me earlier?
Yeah. So 90%, so the forecasts are that 90% of all charging events are going to happen on level 2 charging stations. So we don't like the term, but sometimes that's referred to as slow chargers. And then about 10% of the charging events are going to happen on what are called DC fast chargers, or, the Tesla nomenclature of supercharger, right? The equivalent of that. So when we talk about DC fast charging, that 10% is going to primarily be installed along highway corridors. So that's President Biden's NEVI program, if you're familiar with NEVI. So that's the 500,000 charging stations, that's highway corridors in order to enable that long distance travel. But the other 90% is where people live, work, play, and spend time where the car is sitting idle. Now, the number one area, at home, right? If you have a single family garage, you're going to install an EV charging station. But it's not just there, because if you don't have a garage at your home, it's at a shopping center, it is at the grocery store, it's at all these different areas, at work especially, where I'm spending significant amounts of time and I can charge that vehicle sufficiently.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll come back to that discussion when we talk about, the future of what's going to happen with those stations too. So Don, can you start off just by filling us in, on what's happening? I know that Goshen has a plant in Silicon Valley and you're looking at other markets in the U.S. to build. So can you fill us in on where Goshen is at there?
Yeah, Goshen Inc. is a leading battery manufacturer globally. We manufacture for EVs and as importantly for energy storage for the grids and for enterprise solutions. We're currently building 2 plants in a local for local production strategy in the United States, by the United States, for United States customers and global customers as well. We're building a plant in Illinois and we're building a plant in Michigan as well. Our headquarters is in Fremont, California. And this is part of the wave of not just globalizing energy production for the new economy, but going out strategy to do this regionally. We're doing this in Germany, we're doing this in Morocco, we're doing this in other places, because that's the trend. And you want your supply chains to come locally, and you also want your production chain to be local as well. So that's our strategy.
Okay. And, of course, I know that President Biden has talked about, getting it just like, with the huge influx of manufacturing in the U.S. focused on chips. He's talked about the same thing for EV batteries. Have you had any, with the connection to the parent company, has there been any discussion there or pushback at all? Or do you feel that it's something that's going to be quickly overcome?
I think there are a lot of people. For example, Governor Pritzker in Illinois held an EV and ESS battery day in Illinois last week. And the idea that the state of Illinois there wants to build a regional center for energy production. In fact, we can get into this a little deeper. He was talking about how Illinois is a net energy exporter, but with very solid, strong, sustainable energy goals in terms of the makeup of their grid. And he recognizes that this industry and the storage capabilities are necessary for Illinois to be both a net energy exporter and to have a significant part, if not all, of its energy production in renewable and sustainable sources. So I think we've been very welcome there and very welcomed in Michigan as well. So we see this as an opportunity. for global production, but also global R&D. When you bring technology to a new place, you start building, as you see here in the city of Phoenix, you start seeing a connection here and a connection there, where you start building a hub for technology. And that's a very important in this industry now. You're just starting to see now not just a bow wave on huge global production, that is locally sourced and locally produced, but it's a big global bow wave on energy production for the new economy, but also that R&D, which is critical. You're going to see a lot of changes in the energy storage business over the next 20 years, because companies like Goshen are leading the way on their R&D.
Okay. Well, let's talk about, we read a lot about issues with minerals and, critical shortages, of lithium, other things that are used in battery production, et cetera, around the world. Global tensions, political issues, can all contribute to that. And again, it gets a lot of shiny object headlines about that kind of stuff. But what about the future technology of the batteries? Do you see a time when this is changing, where some of these minerals may not be as needed as they are now, and the types of new technologies that are out there?
Yeah. In current production, particularly with the lithium-ion battery, you can see a snapshot of where critical minerals are needed. But if you look at Goshen's production, it is much, much less dependent upon rare minerals like cobalt. And it's different chemistries you use to reduce that dependence. But as you go through the R&D process and the production process, you're going to see in the future wholesale changes in the chemistry of the actually energy sources for those battery storage and for the EV batteries. And you're just beginning to see this big bow wave from Goshen and other companies who are producing this energy source, but at the same time putting a lot of money into the R&D. You're going to see a lot of changes over the next several years. So you have to look at the material supply as a sunk cost in terms of current production, but then look to changes in those supplies from where they are in certain regions of the world and what those supplies are, because that will happen as the battery industry develops and applies the efforts of the funding it's done with its R&D.
Okay. How much in both of your sectors? We have the batteries, and then we also have the charging stations. There's competitors in those markets. You're not on an island. Do you have other companies? We talked about Goshen and what they're doing in other states. Of course, one of the big stories we have here in Arizona is Core Batteries, huge plant that's going to be built in the valley here. How much does competition in both of those sectors affect pricing and affect, the adoption? Like, you would rather see one type of station used in wider use, but then another company that may have a competitive one. How does this all play out into the market?
Yeah, well,
on both sides for batteries and charging stations.
Yeah, I'd say that's a loaded question, Greg, but I'll try to tackle it. So, first of all, for Blink, we have a two-pronged manufacturing strategy to address competition. One is we have our own manufacturing facility in India that kits out charging stations. They get shipped to the United States, where we have a final assembly production facility in Maryland. So those chargers qualify for what's called Buy America. So when there's a Buy America requirement, we can meet that requirement. But then if we're sort of getting into the trenches on some of the competitive aspects of it, we can actually do finished goods in India and have them shipped directly to the United States. So we can kind of address both. One of the key factors of that, though, for us is vertical integration. So what does that mean? It means we manufacture our own charging stations and we develop the software network that runs those stations. So that's a cloud-based software network. That gives us an advantage kind of in a number of different ways, not only from a cost perspective, but also from an uptime, reliability, our capabilities to address problems in the field when they come about. We're not worried or relying on third parties to do that. So we have a number of different levers that we can pull. And currently, we're a publicly traded company on NASDAQ, and we currently have the highest gross margins of any EV charging company in the industry at the moment. And so we're very confident in that plan and that execution.
What about M&A? What about, from the battery side? How does that affect ultimate pricing? I mean, obviously, the vehicle makers are going to look at who they want to work with, and there's a lot, there's certain alignments that are set up, and sometimes they're hard to change. How does the competition in the battery space just affect the overall pricing and the future of the market?
Well, the more competition, the more efficiency, and the better for the consumer, or the intermediate purchaser, like the car company. But I think it works well in the industry. You have to understand also, it's not just the buy side that produces. You have a lot of competition, but you have a large gap. The energy storage market is expected to grow at a very conservative estimate, 31% between now and 2030. That's just the storage business. That's not the EV business. The EV business may come up and down in terms of the waves, but it'll go up like this. Okay. So the competition is driven by both the gap with capabilities, and also the competition for price and efficiency and quality and resiliency. So those are things we build into the product. For example, with the Goshen production that we expect in the Illinois plant, you have a production unit in terms of its makeup that does much better than its competitors in terms of what engineers like to call thermal incidence, which is like a puncture test. Some batteries will blow up if they're punctured. Ours don't. Okay. And so what you have is you have quality, you have price, but you also have a growing market where a lot of people can compete to enter.
Okay. Isn't there a bigger discussion that people look at what's happening with the vehicle market and the adoption of EVs and how, but behind the scenes, we have to look in the future with changes to the grid to be able to support this. Goshen also makes the larger storage unit type batteries that are used by utilities, as they move to solar power and they used to store battery facilities. But what about the grid? Where what do you think is the future there? Will grids need to be completely made over to support this, or do you think we can gradually move into handling this load that's going to be on the grid?
Yeah, well, I think that the utility companies, move at a kind of a glacial pace, right? So in terms of remaking the whole grid, I think that's a tall task. So I think what you're going to see is more incremental growth. But with that, there's this problem out there that everybody keeps talking about, which is grid capacity and stress on the grid. And, every panel like this that I participate in, that is a core topic. But I take the view that, like any other problem that presents itself in a massive market, there's going to be innovation. And where that innovation comes is actually where companies like Goshen and Blink work together, which is things like microgrids and grid storage and those things. So as an example, we could have, and we do this, we have a DC fast charger and we have a battery energy storage system attached to it. And we can mitigate demand events with that energy storage. So for instance, if you're anybody here live in California, you're familiar with the between 4 and 9 p.m. Dial back, they want you to kind of conserve energy between 4 and 9 p.m. So as an example, between 4 and 9 p.m., if somebody plugs in to charge their EV on a high power DC fast charger with battery energy storage, that electricity is pulled off the battery. It's not pulled off the grid. So there's going to be all of this innovation that happens in order to mitigate this. The United States doesn't have a generation problem. We have a distribution problem. And again, I really think that this is being overblown to some degree, and that you're going to see innovation happen at a really rapid scale to address this.
Does the innovation then help the distribution problem?
Oh, for sure. For sure. Because for instance, Blink, when we look at the strategy of the company, we kind of have 3 pillars that we operate under: operational excellence, customer experience, and helping to manage this energy ecosystem. So the software, the smart software that is tied into the charging stations will be able to manage the amount of electricity that is flowing to the vehicle, either up or down, depending on grid capacity and different events that happen. So you have, a really smart system starting to develop. We're not there yet, but it's getting there very, very rapidly, where we'll be able to work in concert with the utility companies, with companies like Goshen, to really efficiently manage that electricity at a vehicle.
Sure. How much, in terms of what's driving future innovation, how much of it comes from working with the manufacturers of the vehicles, from what they want or what they expect consumers will want, or is it a two-way street that you're working on smaller batteries and lighter batteries and all the time? Where does the sort of the rubber hit the road there in terms of who's driving that?
Well, there's always a drive for efficiency. That's the holy grail for all engineers, as you know. But you get that demand from the customers who get it from their customers. And also, there's a drive for when you have a capital investment, say whether it's an enterprise storage system or a grid storage system. When they make the capital investment, one, they want resilience. Two, they want the long-term investment. And three, they want efficiency from what they get. So they're always looking for that because that drives the per kilowatt hour cost on use. This is similar with EVs. Okay. They want the safest, most robust, best engineered product they can get. They want constant improvement they want for their customers. So that drives the competition both inside the company, but also with competitors as well.
One thing I'm looking about in the future for adoption of EVs and technology is, I think we sort of are going to see, unfortunately, there's haves and have-nots in terms of what countries, what areas of the world will be, switching to EVs first. I mean, obviously, I think, the more industrialized countries, the North America and Europe are the early adopters.
China for sure.
And China for sure. Those,
Yep.
Those are the three areas.
Yep.
So outside of those markets, do you think it's going to be a long time coming before the rest of the world can see this as a viable opportunity, or is it fossil fuel all the way for decades more in those other countries?
Ooh. Okay. So, I think that fossil fuels are going to, even though I'm squarely in the EV industry, I don't have rose-colored glasses on this. Fossil fuels are going to be around for a long time. Now, when we talk about different countries and the adoption rate, a key part of this, when you talk about the haves and have-nots, is the affordability of the vehicle, the adoption in those, what I'll call those primary adoption markets. So you talk about China, you talk about Europe, you talk about the United States and other markets. So as more and more EVs are purchased in those markets, as the prices come down, they become more affordable. You start to generate this huge used car market. And typically that used car market, some of those vehicles get exported to other markets overseas, right? That don't quite have that adoption rate. So I think you're going to start to see that more and more. But the key is in these markets that are leading, we have to get more consumer choice out there. We have to get vehicles that are at lower price points. We have to get vehicles that have the range that consumers are looking for. And we need the infrastructure set up so that people feel like they can go about their daily lives, not radically change what they're doing, and be able to charge their vehicle. Because that's it. I mean, Americans do not like to change what they're doing. They're used to going to a gas station, spending a few minutes, filling up their car, going about their day. So it's only a slight shift when you own an electric vehicle, because instead of going to the gas station, you're going about doing your daily, going about your daily life. And in most cases, there'll be a charging station there. So you don't have to make that separate trip to the gas station. You're going to be able to charge it, again, wherever you kind of live, work, play.
Okay. In Arizona, we've seen a huge influx of federal money recently, through the CHIPS Act for huge semiconductor plants that are expanding and being built here with TSMC, Intel, et cetera. Billions of dollars being funneled here. What do you think the president will move to, expand subsidies, expand incentives, add even more dollars that could go into the EV battery sector to stimulate it the same way that the CHIPS Act funding was done?
Well, you already have recently passed in 2022 the IRA,
right,
which has both consumer credit for EV powered automobiles, but also manufacturing credits, and so that has to work through too, in some process, and I think that I can't predict that the energy manufacturing industry that we're in will need or not need to be further subsidized. But if you look at the potential growth in the market, my guess, and this is my guess, this isn't Goshen saying this, is that maybe not after this, but it may. Okay. But the point is, there are different areas of infrastructure that need to be built up. One is production, actual absolute energy production. If you look at the kilowatt hours, it's something like 4,800 billion kilowatt hours equivalent of Americans using gasoline per year right now. If you switched every car by wave of a wand, you would have to have a demand of about 50-60% increase over what the grid produces right now. Okay, so the market is there, and the companies like Gotion are moving to the market and moving not just in a global way, but in a local to local way. So I think that in large part the market will assert itself, and players in the market and responsible companies like Gotion who are trying to meet that demand for consumers will fill that market.
Okay. And you're using, I think even you have an example here in Arizona and something that you're, one of the Salt River project.
We supply batteries for the vendor who's working with Salt River Project.
Right.
Yes.
And so you're going to be, your batteries will be installed in a couple of those new projects that they're working on for solar storage.
Yeah. And so that business is growing. And then what we're doing here in the United States is to make sure that it's a local for local production. Built by Americans in American factories, energy production factories for American customers.
Yeah, one of the things that gets overlooked a lot, by the way, and there's so much noise and rhetoric in the market, and obviously the election and the craziness never ceases, right? But one of the things that gets overlooked is that 100% of the electricity that's used in an EV is produced here. There is no importing of energy from the Middle East or from, electricity from the Middle East. It's all produced here. It's domestically produced energy. So when you talk about energy security, energy independence of the United States, electric vehicles is about as good as you can get. And that doesn't get talked about enough.
What about then, obviously we know the federal plan to build out this network across the country of stations. Where is that at right now in terms of its development? And do you think there'll have to be something done to speed it up? Is it behind schedule, ahead of schedule? Where is that at?
Yeah, I think it's, generally speaking, I think it's kind of where we expected it to be. Neither ahead nor behind significantly. One of the things you have to remember is that this is a DC fast charging network, and it just takes a long time to get these sites built out, to get them prepped, to get them permitted. There's lead times on transformers and switchgear and all of those things, like our Siemens colleague that spoke a little while ago, right? They're a huge provider of this stuff, and there's a lot of demand for it right now. So there's lead times on that stuff. So if you're in the industry, you knew it was going to take this long because you're used to these projects. When you're on the outside looking in, it's easy to perhaps take shots at it because, it just takes a while. But that's no deviation from where it's been.
Okay. One of the big headlines that we saw this week was about Tesla and, what they're going to do, what the big change that they're making with their with their charging unit and the layoffs and relooking at the business unit and their plans for the future. Looking past the rhetoric on that one, what do you think that means for your industry? What about the whole idea that people really don't understand that the universal adapter is a thing now? It's not something, people say, well, I have a Tesla. How do I, how can I, if I don't have a Tesla, what do I do? Yeah.
So in the spirit of, nobody saw this one coming. Elon Musk's announcement to do this to the supercharger network was very surprising. Number one, I feel terrible for all the people that were laid off because I think it was about 500 people. So no small numbers. Why he did it, at face value, it was probably an operational cost decision. It was probably a little bit more of a short-term decision to shore the company up a little bit because they're under margin pressure and pricing pressure, just like everybody else. So, but I am worried about Blink and I focus on Blink. So when I see something like that happen, and when our sales team and business development teams see something like that happen, we view it as opportunity. And we are already manufacturing and deploying Tesla plugs, right? So they're called NACS, North American Charging Standards. So we already have both level 2 and DC fast chargers that are NACS. We have configurations that are 2 plugs with NACS. We have configurations that are one CCS, one NACS. I mean, our whole mantra at Blink is that we are flexible and that we can adapt. So as the market shifts, we have the chassis of our charging station, and if plug adapters or configurations change, we just have to source the cables that that are kind of the thing of the day, if you will, in order to meet that need.
Okay. So in looking at the future and looking at where we're going, we mentioned the big inflection point that could come in a couple of years when we get a lot of lower priced models on the market. And I think maybe there's a little anxiety, isn't there, over purchasing a used EV. People wonder about, what about the battery? How long will it last? That's kind of another bit of anxiety that plays into that. Do you think that can be overcome as well, that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, manufacturers are offering incredible warranties on the battery when you buy it used. So to me, that's kind of a non-issue. And by the way, right now, with all the craziness going on, you can buy a used battery electric vehicle for like very, very affordable right now.
Plus, the battery technology is changing. I mean, one of the goals Goshen always had is when you look at an EV battery, we want, that battery will still be working after you decide to get rid of the rest of the car. Yep. Okay, so that's a goal to have, and that works. That both pays off in terms of consumer desire, but it's also a cost desire in terms of life cycle, total cost of ownership. When you have a car, so that works. That's where companies like Goshen are forging ahead and doing that, delivering that today and delivering even more efficiently tomorrow.
And there's two really interesting aspects of that Don mentions. One is the recyclability of car batteries. It's something like more than 90% of the content of a car battery can get recycled and used in a new car battery. The second application, which I really think is going to be super interesting, is when the battery is at the end of its life cycle in a vehicle, it still has plenty of capacity. And those batteries are going to get converted to home energy storage and other storage systems. And that's not far-fetched. I mean, that's technology that can be done now. So there is really some cool applications that are going to come from the second life of the battery.
Yeah. There's inherent value in the battery itself, other than like when you have the gas tank for a car, it's scrap metal. Well, the battery has scrap metal, but it still has inherent use after the life cycle of the car.
Yeah. Okay. And what about, when you're looking at, the technology and the way that's going, we've talked about that and the future with the car prices coming down. What, in terms of, forward thinking people in this room and looking at investment opportunities in the future, like, people see headlines, they react, oh, this is bad, whatever. But someone had, the people who are really thinking ahead are the ones that always come out ahead. So if you're looking ahead, if you're forward thinking in the EV industry, what are you looking at as the future opportunities for investment, do you think?
Well, I think that it goes directly to the EV, but also what undergirds the EV. Okay, you have, as I said earlier, the energy storage market is going to grow by 30% in the next 6 years. Okay, how does that relate to EVs? That's the production. That's the battery in the car is the endpoint distribution of the energy. The production grid and the production of energy are the beginning points for the energy for those vehicles. Mm-hmm. And you not only there's a gap there, you need increased production, but also as you move from energy sources, you need increased capabilities to store that fuel. Okay. And that's essentially what a battery is. That's what gasoline is. It's a store of energy. And you need to store that energy and just again, to requote the governor of Illinois, he's on a path to set the state to still be a net energy exporter while increasing the load the grid produced in Illinois to sustainable renewables with those two goals. He'll have to do that with increased storage capabilities. Okay. And that's where the market's going to go across the country and across the globe. If you look at the US IRA, if you look at the programs put in place by the Europeans and then also the Indian government, they're all going that way. And they're having focus on certain areas in the infrastructure support for EVs, which is not just energy production, but also distribution. Mm-hmm. And increasing funding. And it's going that in some of these other areas of the globe as well as the United States, so that they start to integrate together. Are
there any areas that are further ahead? Like, are we playing catch up in any way to other markets, do you think? Or is it all a pretty level playing field?
Globally?
Yeah.
No, I don't think it is. I think in the United States is behind in both the storage capabilities and in the distribution.
Yep. And also,
As well as, go ahead.
yeah, and also just in EV adoption in general, right? So we have the benefit. Part of our business, a significant part of our business, is that we actually own and operate charging stations. So we sell them, but we also own and operate them. And we own and operate them in the United States, in Europe, and in other markets. And we have the benefit of seeing the utilization trends happening in Europe versus the US. So the US is definitely behind. But to your original question about investment and et cetera, I'm as bullish as I have ever been on the market. I'm as bullish as I've ever been on Blink. I think this is a blip in the road. Now that I'm in my 50s, I think I've seen stuff like this kind of come and go, where you have these big market spikes, and then you have a little bit of you have a little bit of churn in the water. The market kind of resets itself a little bit, and then it really kind of takes off again. So that's fully what I expect to happen, and that's what we're planning for.
Okay. And if you mentioned, though, that we're still playing catch up in a couple of areas versus other parts of the world, what's our biggest challenge then to catch up? Like, what's the focus? What do we need to accomplish in the next 2 years to be able to
from our perspective, it's infrastructure. From our perspective, that's very self-serving, but it's infrastructure. Because again, I'll just come right back to the beginning. The number one reason somebody doesn't buy an EV is range anxiety / visibility of infrastructure. So we got to get that in the ground.
It's the EV infrastructure and the energy storage capabilities.
Sure.
Both those. Sure.
And is there any, in terms of any political backstop in terms of what could happen this year in the election, is that playing into the market at all? Was anybody thinking about, well, if there's a change in the White House, could there be could that change the effect on the industry? Could it help? Could it hurt? Has that been part of the discussion yet?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we talk about that. So I'll answer it like this, very gingerly. Look, again, there's a lot of craziness out there right now. Ultimately, what we think is, regardless of who's in the White House, all of this is going to settle down, and the market's going to be the market, and it's going to continue to accelerate. That's what we think.
I think it's right. I think Goshen wouldn't be, we're investing in plants that are a couple $2 billion each. You're going to have a total of 5,000 employees. We're not betting those jobs in that investment on the short term. We're betting it on the long term. So I think his point is accurate there.
And what about the growth trajectory for Goshen? You're in California. You have the other two plants. Arizona still has some space available. Where do you see the next level of expansion for the company?
I've taken the hint. I'll file it away and move it upstairs in the corporation. Yes. Okay. No, but I've had experience in another life with Phoenix, and I think it's a great location. I think it's a great place to be. The city bends over backwards to make sure, and then there's a wide array of technologies here. It's not just software. It's not just hardware. And I'll stop this commercial for Phoenix now, but it is a great place to be in all sorts of technological areas.
Okay, so I guess it sounds like from what you're saying that in some ways, I guess if you made it a commercial, the best is yet to come. But
there you go. And the same way with our industry as well.
Yeah. Is there anything that keeps you up at night in terms of an obstacle that this is the one I know infrastructure. Well, that's a big obstacle, but anything else that that you see as a concern in the U.S. market in particular, other than the slow? We're not matching other markets in terms of adoption of EVs. That's one perception problem.
Yeah, I would say that
we talked about that. It's changing.
Yeah. I don't think it keeps me up at night, but I will answer it this way: is that we have a lot of collaboration with government in our business, and we collectively need to make sure that we have the right charger in the right place at the right time, and that we're not artificially putting charging stations where they're not needed and where the visibility is not there, because it creates this cycle where where people are not buying EVs and we're not putting the infrastructure where it's really needed, it's going to actually slow down the adoption of EVs in those markets. So I know it's touchy, it's dicey, but I think you have to talk about it. And, our end goal is the same. Everybody's end goal is exactly the same. And that is, how do we get more EVs on the road? How do we get more infrastructure out there? So to the degree that we can, we really just need alignment between the public and private sector to make sure that infrastructure is going into the right areas.
We have a show of hands. How many EV owners do we have here today?
Hybrid. We didn't talk about hybrid.
Okay. How many are thinking about buying one in the next year? Okay. So we're probably, if we did the percentage, we're probably right where the rest of the country.
California, California's at 22%. 22% of all new cars sold in California are BEVs, which is kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Is
the notion of hybrid, is that the future, or is it just again kind of a shiny object, kind of a rhetoric thing?
Am I allowed to say I don't know?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think the jury's out on that one. I personally think that hybrids is a hedge for a consumer on making that full transition, which is okay. Again, I look to 127 million households, 2+ cars.
Yeah,
you can do one ICE, you can do one hybrid, but I think you're kind of actually shortchanging yourself, because I think you can have one ICE, you can have one fully battery electric vehicle, and you will be very happy you did. So if anybody, I don't know, for those of you that own a BEV, and again, I have, guys, I'll full transparency, I have a Tesla and I have an F-150 truck. That F-150 truck does not get very good gas mileage, right? But I love the truck, but I also love the Tesla. And guess what? The truck sits a lot more now than the Tesla does, because in our daily lives.
Have you bought the new sound system that you can install in that Tesla to make it sound like a 150 truck?
That's probably not. But in our daily lives, like once I'm 3 years into owning an electric vehicle, and it is used way more than the internal combustion engine vehicle, way more.
Okay, well, we're about to wrap up here, and I know we have the lunch session is coming up shortly. Can we just end with any final thoughts? Don, start with you, and then. I don't think we've beat it to death, but I think the key issues I think in the United States are the infrastructure and different parts of the infrastructure. Think of the infrastructure as a supply chain, and on production and storage of energy. I think if there's focus there, then the rest will flow fairly well, because the market and the companies in the market to serve their consumers will go for the best price, best efficiency they can. But I think if you address those infrastructure issues, and the government's trying to do that, and the markets are trying to do that as well. Right.
But
But
I think if there's increased focus there, then you have a smoother path of adoption.
Okay.
I would leave you with, as you look at the market, sift through the smoke. And there's a lot being said. The growth rate of EVs is down, no question, granted. But I also know I've been in the automotive industry my entire career, and Honda just came out. I think they committed $30 billion to EV production or battery production, et cetera.
Yeah.
But Toyota just came out. Now they're the hybrid kings, right? They just came out with an additional $1.8 billion worth of investment. So guys, the billions keep coming from these automakers, and they're not doing it because they don't believe in the future of EVs. So that's where you have to sift through this and look at what's happening. And what's happening is the automakers, although they may have some automakers, not Hyundai, Kia, by the way, have slowed down some of the product plans. Others are going full steam ahead. And they all, I think, have a common denominator, recognizing that this is ultimately what's going to happen. It's just a question. There's just debate on the pace at which it's going to happen. That's it.
I think, Hyundai, Kia looks like they could be poised to
they're doubling down.
Take over the number 2 behind Tesla at some point.
They are doubling down.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank our panelists today for a very spirited discussion. I appreciate their input.